Welcome to Adding Value with Schaefer, the show where we dive into the stories, strategies, and market insights shaping the world of industrial and logistics real estate. In each episode, we sit down with industry leaders, investors, developers, and tenants to explore their journeys, unpack current market trends, and share takeaways that can help you better understand and navigate the business. You guys can work through this, right? Like you can
screw up all you want. You can screw up all you want. You're doing real well on this to start. So I see things being positive going in.
Well, it means good news for all of us.
I hope so.
Yeah.
If not, you can roll back the tape and yell.
Yeah, that's right.
I would say a common trait and something for young people or new people in the industry to think about for successful brokers is the ability to listen.
Value creation is not just about the numbers and the financial stuff. It's about creating value for our customer.
I remind myself, like, this is the business we got into. This is what we got into.
Yeah.
The prerequisite was that you just don't give up.
We having the Kelsey brothers on next time?
Maybe, who knows? Today, I'm honored to welcome Jackson Smith, partner in Newcastle. Jackson has been with Newcastle since 2003 and brings deep experience in industrial and commercial real estate across Southern California. Throughout his career, Jackson has overseen and developed tens of millions of square feet of industrial construction throughout the Inland Empire and currently has several projects under construction in the IE. Jackson's deep development background, paired with his current role in acquisitions and project oversight, gives him a unique view into how institutional and private capital assess and execute logistics real estate deals. In this conversation, we'll dig into what he looks for in deals, how development risk is managed, and where he sees the opportunity ahead. Welcome to the show. Jackson, thank you for coming today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Shai. I appreciate it.
Of course. A little bit of a cool story. I remember when I first got started in the business, I started boots on the ground in Chino. And so I did a lot of walking up and down the streets. And I remember one of the first buildings that really caught my eye was a building off of Schaefer.
Sure.
And I think I started in 2014.
Yeah.
So it might have delivered just before
probably
that.
Right before that. Yeah. Probably 2012.
And I remember seeing this huge billboard sign that said, developed and available for lease by Newcastle Partners. And me thinking to myself, I'm like, yeah, that's a great looking building.
Yeah.
And what a cool name. And I was like, maybe one day, I'll meet these guys.
Yeah.
So, 10 years later, here we go.
Yeah. That's one of those buildings that it's a good story. And, I don't, it's a team effort, what we do at Newcastle. But one of the things that I really enjoy doing is kind of the front end, the land acquisition, but also kind of the design.
Mm-hmm.
And if you recall, that building had some rusted steel panels on the front of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I stole that from a Starbucks in Santa Ana. I drove by one day and I go, that is the coolest thing. So I take a couple pictures and send it over to the architect. And so, you never know where the inspiration is going to come from.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So
well,
it's fun.
Yeah, no, a great building. And I appreciate you coming in. And just for those who may not know a little bit about you and your background, your experience, can you tell us a little bit about yourself
Sure.
and Newcastle Partners?
Sure. Yeah. My path through to the development business was a little bit circuitous. I really had no intention of doing what I'm doing today, even though I really enjoy it. My dad was in the industrial development business and building buildings in Anaheim and Orange in late 70s, early 80s, and just got killed by 20% interest rates,
Mm-hmm.
high levered guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went off to school in 82. I go, okay, I'm going to, study hard, get a finance degree, which I did. And I had all these big plans of, doing something in finance, maybe going to international and going to Spain or something. And, one thing led to another and I graduated and I go, well, I guess I'm not going to Spain. Life had other ideas for me. And I ended up going to work for the Carson companies in the South Bay.
Okay.
I didn't know what else to do. I considered brokerage, but, I've got a younger brother, excuse me, who is very good at sales.
Mm-hmm.
And you either can do sales or you can't.
Sure.
And he was very, very good at it. And I didn't like no. I didn't like taking the answer no. So I went into property management. So I went to the Carson companies and
they're still around today.
They're still around today.
Yeah.
And that's where I cut my teeth in the industrial business, managing buildings that were built in the 50s and 60s and all kinds of environmental problems. And they threw 2.5 million square feet at me right out of college. And it was quite an experience. So that's where I got started. And then I actually met for the first time Dennis Higgs,
Mm-hmm.
who is my current business partner at Newcastle. he was running a REIT called Meridian Industrial Trust.
Okay.
And so I was interviewing, kind of looking to make the next move into asset management and trying to get in the development side of things. And as many of the property managers out there will know, it's a very thankless business. It's really, it's tough.
It is.
And so I just kind of wanted to make a career move. And I met Dennis, interviewed, and got a job at Meridian Industrial Trust. They had an office in LA. So ran that for a couple of years, and then they sold to Prologis. And they, like they do now, it was an asset play. So all the employees had to find another opportunity. And I met Jeff Phelan at Panattoni.
Yep.
So in the early days, that would have been probably 96.
Were you already doing development at that point?
No, my role at Meridian was more of an asset manager.
Okay.
I really wanted to get into the development side of things, but Meridian was out acquiring things. And so I had some experience with the industrial that Dennis liked, and then we were trying to get some assets in the Inland Empire. So that was kind of really my foray into the IE, helping acquire assets from Meridian in the Inland Empire. And so I did that. We built maybe one or two buildings, but it was outside sourced to a third-party development group, but kind of oversaw it. So I started to like, okay, this is really kind of where I started to really hone my interest anyway. And then, it's a funny story. So we, Meridian owned a property next to a property in Camarillo that Panattoni was going to develop.
Okay.
And they needed an easement. So that's how I met Phelan.
Okay.
And so we were negotiating an easement, and I said, oh, by the way, I need a job.
Oh.
And so I helped him and a couple other guys.
It's probably the best interview. You guys were already working together.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, one thing led to another, and then I worked for Panattoni for 6-7 years, just banging, industrial buildings up in the IE. It was a great opportunity.
For sure. I mean, what intrigued you about development? Because it sounds like you've had a very holistic career. You've seen many sides of the business, but what was it about development that kind of got your juices going?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I guess as a kid, I always liked to build stuff. I like the service side of it, but I felt a little bit unfulfilled. And I just like tinkering with stuff. That's why I say, I mean, an industrial building is just a box, but I can throw a little creativity at it by driving by Starbucks and go, that's a cool idea, So, and I like that finished product. I like starting with something and then having a finished product.
Right.
I'm pretty goal oriented that way. So I like the process. When I finish it, then I'm ready to go on and do the next one. So I think it's, the whole thing is, like we talked about the other day, it's super challenging and, in any environment, whether it's, 1999 or 2025, there's all kinds of challenges. And I think that's a big part of it. And solving that and having that satisfaction.
And have, it sounds like you really like just kind of also leaving your wrinkle on the experience, your fingerprint on it. Yeah.
Yeah. I stopped short of logos and emblems and, putting brass plates in the sidewalk. I just like to, a little bit more, like a little more unique. I mean, we'll take certain elements of our buildings that I think work really well. Again, not to keep going back to those rusted metal plates that we did on Schaefer, but I put those in my conference room in the office, in our office. I just liked it,
Yeah.
And then we had a couple of buildings that we built down off of near Harley Knox down in South Perris. And there were a couple elements that, we took and it's applied to a building we're building right now in Hesperia. So, certain things like that. So you can kind of tell.
Yeah. And has most of your experience been throughout the Inland Empire or Southern California?
Yes. All of the development we do is strictly industrial. We're California based, but most of the development, if not all of it, has really been in the IE. We've done a couple things in Orange County, but mostly IE.
And you've been in the business for a very long time. How has, because we hear so many different conversations about how development has gotten continuously harder and harder, especially in Southern California, and different cities and jurisdictions in the Inland Empire. How would you say it has changed over the course of your career?
How much time do we have?
Yeah. Well, you got it all the time.
No. I think in 99, 2000, yeah, I truly was a merchant builder, right? I mean, we were buying finished lots. They were zoned for the use. You had to go through, cities of Ontario and Rancho and get them approved, and the Republic, Planning Commission. But it's pretty straightforward, dude. I mean, CEQA we were doing what's called an MND. It was pretty straightforward. You could have you'd be permits building in 12 to 18 months was pretty typical in those days. We would argue, arm wrestle with staff over how much glass we were putting in the building, how much gingerbread. That was the hard part. That's why I thought, I'm a developer, man. I'm out here building, in Commerce Center South and 2001, 2002, and thinking, man, I got this thing figured out.
Yeah. So a couple wins here and there.
And fast forward to today, and I think the challenges have become obviously, you've got costs, you have opposition. Opposition in those days would be somebody get up and, hey, there's not enough trees. We don't like the blue. Can you change it to gray? That kind of stuff. That's what I used to hear at planning commission hearings. I hate to say it, but there were some planning commission hearings I didn't even go to.
Yeah.
Because it was just such a slam dunk. Like nobody cared about industrial in those days, And so you fast forward to today and, a 12 to 18 month process in 2000 is 3 to 4 years for entitlement, another year to build it. If you can get it through, there's a lot of cities now that are obviously, are opposed to industrial development. So you have to be careful where you're going and what the timing is. We just had our last city council hearing on a project in Rancho, and you're, it's nerve wracking, man. You just don't know how that thing's going to go. And so, I think we've developed a recipe for success in those hearings and understand and really working. I mean, when we say roll up our sleeves with staff, you really have to do that. You've got to be cognizant. You have to do community outreach. There's dollars set aside for, certain things, community benefit fees and things like that we never had. I mean, fees and, in certain cities, there used to be, $6-7 a square foot on the building, $14-15. That's just one line item. Construction costs, they went through the roof and, 20, 21, 22. And you were pre-ordering roof structure and things like that. And then and then the project doesn't go. And now you've got this commitment for roof structure. And so it's a lot more challenging in many, many layers. And so you just have to, we're fixers now almost. It's literally like, it's not, the merchant build idea is gone by the wayside. You really are land entitlement. We've tried to, for the most part, stay away from rezones and things like that, because that just adds another layer that's very difficult.
When you say merchant build, you mean there's the concept of buying land, building it, and selling a building.
Yeah, think of it as like a residential developer that buys lots from the master builder. They're going to build 50 homes in a community. That's what we used to do. Like when in the early days in Ontario, streets were curb and guttered, utilities inside face a curb. Sometimes you had sidewalks. You just come in, it was zoned light industrial, warehouse, what have you, and you would just roll. Just come in with single line drawings, 6 pages of drawing, landscape, site plan, elevation, a couple other things, and you'd put it, hand it across the counter. They'd check it in. They get back to you in 45, 60 days and go, okay, yeah, you're approved at DAB. We got to go do a planning commission hearing. And then you start construction drawings and you'd be rolling.
So you say like back in the day, it was far more streamlined. Today, the lift is actually, or the value creation is really just in securing those entitlements because it's so much more challenging.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Just the risk that we take, right? I mean, we would close on land at that time, but it was almost a certainty that you would get your building approved. Today, right? And it went full circle. Then we went to buying land that was unentitled. It was zoned for the use, but we, including capital, were willing to take the risk that it would get approved. And that was unheard of, in the early 2000s. Everybody's like, no, you got to get entitled. But you could reasonably ask a seller for 6-month escrow. Okay. You got through the planning commission hearing, right? Now it's nearly, well, you can't close on it, and it's 3 to 4 years. And that's a very difficult conversation for a land seller. Like
Especially in this market. Yeah.
Especially in this market. Not only, even when the values, when the values were, peaking, you could probably, I had a couple of those where we could, you're dishing off non-refundable deposits. You're paying as you go. You're spending $1 million or $2 million, depending on the size of the project. So the seller knows you're doing that. You're creating value for them. So if you cough it up, they know they've probably got a backstop.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a story that you could tell. And meanwhile, the value that was creating was, yes, the entitlements, but also the market was on fire. Be honest, it's better to be lucky than smart in a lot of these circumstances where, I would, as a retail kind of merchant builder, I'm not really stealing land.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly I'm paying what the market is and keeping my fingers crossed that I get bailed out, as costs are going up, that the land basis is also going up, rents are going up.
Right.
So, we're basically buying into a futures market, and you have to convince partners, capital, lenders that it's a viable development, but it's also that was a smoother transition. You could see the end of it clear 5-10 years ago. Today it's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's just, myself included, we just don't take projects to capital anymore that doesn't have a clear path, a timeline, and the economics,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like the economics have to work today because
Mm-hmm.
we're all, again, 5+ years ago, you were buying into a futures market. You could pretty much okay, buy land today for 35, it's going to be worth 40, what have you. Today, what are we, high teens, and most of the stuff that you and I are looking at, maybe low 20s, it's probably unentitled. And so you've got to work through the next 2 to 3 years to get that entitled, and that seller's got to sit and wait. And oh, by the way, he was expecting 45 or 50 5 years ago.
Right.
So there's still that disconnect.
There's disconnect for sure. It's 5 years ago, or they say 2021 for argument's sake, or leading into 2022, the market, there was so much of a frenzy, right, for just space. And we were hit 1% vacancy. Then and rents were climbing. I could see that the conversation was a lot easier to have with capital, developers, investors, that, whatever you're going to be buying at that time was going to appreciate in value. I can see that conversation is substantially harder today because rents for the most part have been declining. So it's hard to sell somebody else that, hey, this is what it works out on today's number today. But, don't worry, things are going to be better in 2 years, right? When they're looking at it like rents are kind of going down. Yeah.
And I think if you can find sellers who, there are opportunities to partner with land sellers.
Sure.
That are true sellers that want to sell, but are rightfully so having heartburn. I've had a couple of deals that didn't work out that I was in, at a higher number, and you negotiate, and you as the market's continuing to fall, you're like, look, we just can't perform. Right. So if you can partner with that land seller, go,
on a joint venture.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's agree that the land value today, as an example, okay, it's going to be worth $18 when it's entitled, right? That's a far cry from 45 or 50.
Right.
But that's what capital tells us today. Look, if you want to do a deal, it's got to be right size. It's got to be the right market in the IE, and it's high teens. That's where we're willing to transact.
Mm-hmm.
No, I haven't found a seller yet that's willing to do that, but those are the conversations we're having.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
But if you believe in the market and you don't want to sit on the dirt and you're actually a seller, because the discussion I like to have with the land sellers, and that's a big part of why I enjoy the industrial side of it, is sitting down with property owners, sitting in their living room and like, look, this is what we can do. You might hear something from somebody else, but this is what we can do. And I'll shoot straight with you. Today it's worth $18. But if you sit on it, it still might be 18 in 3 years. But if we go through, because there isn't any other, right, you have to convince yourself and the land seller that highest and best use is industrial.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that, then there's a value that gets created for both parties when it's entitled.
Exactly.
because the capital just absolutely will not close today without it fully seasoned, and most of it's permit ready, right? Some of them will take it on if you've been through the public hearings, they're seasoned, that appeal period has been waived. Some will close, most, but there are others that are like, no, you got to be shovel ready. That's another 12 months.
And the risk of that, the way the capital is looking at it, the risk is they're just so concerned about either political pushback or opposition in the community that you might not get entitlements. So they don't want to actually place their money into the dirt until you have those, to your point, permit ready or shovel
That's
ready.
Right. And look, there are legitimate concerns from neighborhood residences, and not that we were necessarily out in front of it, but I can tell you all the development deals that we have, which is 6, 7, just aren't anywhere within 1,000 feet of a sensitive receptor, just by virtue of what I do. We co-invest with our partners, so it's just as much my money as theirs. So I never felt like that was the right thing to do anyway. And that's not patting myself on the back. It was just like, I don't really, I don't want to be across from a church. I don't want to be in someone's backyard. I don't want it in my backyard. So it was just something that we looked at a long time ago. So we didn't really have any issues with anything that we've put in play in the last 5 years with AB98 as an example. So, and certainly anything that I look at today obviously isn't anywhere near those sensitive receptors, but you have that. You do have political opposition groups that again, depending on their bent and what they're focused on, they're very aggressive now. The industry's been paying them off for a long time. Our ventures have written checks to groups to get our projects, don't oppose it. But now they do oppose them, right? They'll get up, not only at public hearing, but there are legitimate risks of them suing you and tying you up for years,
which can cost you even more money.
Well, you could lose the deal, right? I mean, you might, and that's you might be able to manage that risk if you're in escrow in a long term and you've got a solid understanding. But if you own the dirt, you're in trouble. And we had one very similar that it's something, like I said, it's just better to be lucky sometimes. I just happened to be traveling abroad, and we had a planning commission hearing coming up on a particular project. So I wanted to just get out and watch the last couple of planning commission hearings, just so I could get a feel, read the room, just sitting in the car, bored, and I'm watching this planning commission hearing, and I'm like, because they turned down a project very similar to ours, and we were like the next one on the next round. And so there was a mad scramble behind the scenes trying to get that sorted out. There was, it was after the November election, so the council had changed, the planning commission, and the environment had changed. I mean, it literally was 4-1 in favor 90 days prior to 1-4 or 4-1 opposed. And we owned the dirt. We took the risk. And
how everybody on every council member had changed, or just some of them had
one? Yeah. There were 2 new members,
and they flipped the other ones.
And they flipped the other one. There were 5. Yeah, so there was 2, and they flipped 2 others. So it was 4-1 against.
Wow.
That I watched the month before, and I said, and so there was a lot of backdoor wrangling and sorting it out, and we got through. But that's the kind of stuff. That's why you wouldn't own anything today without going through the entitlement and then closing afterwards. So yeah, that's a huge change from what it was, just
a couple of years ago.
Building, and even, I mean, it's progressively gotten worse, but I think each year it's harder and harder, and there are bigger challenges, and that's why it's been effective in terms of slowing industrial development. Now the flip side is, if you can find deals, the stuff we have in the pipeline, I feel very, very good about, because the supply is really diminished.
Sure. Right.
Because of all of these challenges. And some of our competitors, they've gone to other states. That's fine. We're we're just indigenous to Southern California. I almost said I enjoy the challenges, not those. Those are because those are hard. I like the challenges where I can kind of figure out how to get through,
Yep.
But those opposition groups, man, it's tough. And some of them aren't willing to settle anymore. So you have to be really cognizant of what and jurisdiction you're in and whatnot. But I just think there's going to be an uptick in value for existing stuff that's either under construction, in the next 2 to 3 years. I don't have a crystal ball, but I just have I've been doing this long enough where I know that the users are starting to come back. You're starting to see some build-to-suit transactions. You're starting to see some user land sales. I think that's always a harbinger of good things to come.
For sure. And to your point earlier, because there really haven't been speculative land that has sold to developers, there's been a few, but very, very limited. Once our inventory does get absorbed and, we have the new construction does get absorbed, there's not going to be any inventory behind it. So we're going to have a little bit of a bottleneck there, which is going to put pressure on pricing to increase.
Yeah.
Speaking of, one thing you mentioned earlier was about, the trend of closing on land unentitled. And, for me, I've been in the business now for 11 years, and I really didn't start working on land deals until there was a surge in demand. And I say 19, 20, 2021. So that's all I ever knew.
Yeah.
All I ever knew was this frothy market that if you had a piece of dirt, all you had to do was make one phone call to a developer, and he or she would pay the highest comp on the market at that time and close in 45 and plus a 15, and it was just a seamless transaction, and they would take on the entitlement risk, and then all you had to do was worry about when the building was delivered, that you'd help with the lease up assignment.
Yeah.
But the more, as interest rates kind of increased and the AB98 passed, the more I looked at it and I was like, I don't know. And obviously I don't have a crystal ball either, but I just don't see a path in which there will be a time again where developers will close unentitled, because the risk is so much, especially when you throw in the kind of AB98 sensitive receptors into the picture. Anything infill is kind of impacted by that.
100%.
And so, who would want to take that risk, especially assuming the seller is going to want a market value and they're holding out for a market value? So are we going to go back to just 12-month escrows when it comes to development? It's at least for the foreseeable future, 12, 18-month escrows.
I think it's the only way to transact. I agree with you. I don't see it changing. I think there's got to be an education process. And I like being part of it. You bring me something like that, we sit down with the land seller and go, look, if you're really a seller, then this is how we're going to get there, and how we can transact is with those entitlements in place. Depends on the jurisdiction. Some of them, everything's in EIR now. And again, I think that's a big change that we talked about a little bit earlier, but from an MND, it's pretty straightforward. Now everything's EIR, full-blown CEQA studies that take 18 months to complete, and so you just have to get through that. The comfort you can provide to a seller, I think, is a couple layers. One, we're spending big dough, right? I mean, even 200,000 square foot building, it's probably $1.5 million that it's out of pocket, at risk during that entire process. So keep them informed. Like, look, we're going to spend $1.5 million on your site. We'll share some deposits. We'll go non-refundable on a couple things. These will be non-refundable but applicable to the purchase price. So you're getting some money along the way. It's kind of like an option. And then if you can convince them, and then because there's no way to project what that land value is going to be worth, right? All we can do today is value what the numbers make sense for today. Because also, I would like to be able to take that to a capital partner.
Yep. Because
the other thing that, if you bring me a piece of land, you want to be able to tell the land seller, look, these guys have XYZ in their hip pocket. Okay, it's already been vetted. We know what the numbers are. We're solid at this. If you're comfortable at this number, it's not going to get any worse than that. And they're going to invest in the project, and they're going to take your land, and at least it'll be entitled. even if they don't perform, it'll be entitled.
Mhm.
And then you can do a quick sale,
Right.
right?
If you're unhappy with whatever the number is, or they back out at that point, you can reposition, and sell
Yeah,
to someone else in theory.
yeah. But the other point is that, buying into the futures market, which I always do. I always have the rose-colored glasses on. I think today's value at 18, when I get it entitled, it's going to be worth more. I just don't know how much more. And so you say to the seller, okay, let's split that some percentage, right? Just make it simple. We'll split whatever the difference is between $18 and what it's worth when we finish in 2 or 3 years. We'll split the difference. You can have that. We'll close. And that goes into your pocket. At least they know they're riding the upside and they're not
For sure.
capped.
They're not. Yeah.
So, I do think I'm starting to have more conversations like that. We haven't transacted. But I do think that's the only way we're going to be able to close on dirt.
Yep.
Otherwise, we're looking at, we're pivoting and looking at existing stuff, doing some value plays. I mean, I know what these buildings cost to build. Maybe there's a retrofit or there's a value add play. So, there are existing things that are a little bit older, second, third gen, that are priced right.
Mhm.
You and I have kind of talked about a couple of those things. It's just got to be the right one.
Yep.
But there's value there too.
Yeah. And I think it's very valuable that, I hear you say that you enjoy being part of the education process with the property owner.
Yeah.
And one thing, just speaking from a broker's perspective, that I've noticed is that the developers out there that are actually have kind of similarly like a boots on the ground presence, like the brokers who get in there and get in meetings. Not only do they obviously add value to those relationships, but they tend to have the most success, because it really is helpful to, meet with someone when you're the buyer and build that personal relationship. Yep. Especially in a market today, because one of the most challenging, and I'm sure you've heard this from a lot of brokers, is one of the most challenging conversations is having that conversation as a broker with a property owner today. Now, if you have it with someone who trusts you, who you have a pre-existing relationship with, then it's not a problem. But I noticed very quickly as land values, because let's just for argument's sake say in 2022, right, first quarter 22. A nice site in the Inland Empire West, plus or minus 10 acres, was trading or being valued at $100 a square foot.
Yeah.
And there were a couple comps that traded at that value. And then very quickly, as interest rates went up, right, what it did to the math was you had to kind of change your underwriting as what your exit cap rate is. On the finished project, and then rents went down, and so it quickly, for people so they can understand, like the value that was being lost wasn't being from like the construction costs. It was all coming from the land. So as building prices came down, land quickly depreciated.
Yeah.
And so we were then having conversations with property owners, and like I said, if it was somebody that I might not have met, and even a conversation as simple as, what is it worth, right? They would always say, what do you guys think it's worth? And anytime I felt like I was honest about what it was worth, immediately there was opposition. You're trying to steal my property. You're just a broker, this and that. So I learned very quickly that, first of all, I'm not proud about saying this, but I learned this from another very well-respected broker. I was on a phone call, and a landowner said, "What is my land worth?" And he just said, "You know what? It's not a great time to sell right now. You don't want to sell right now. The numbers are going to be too low. Why don't we just, revisit the conversation when the market picks up in 2 or 3 years?" And I realized at least you still had a friend, versus, an adversary, somebody thought you were trying to steal their property from them. And most of these property owners, look, I mean, I'm sure there's motivated owners out there that are true market sellers. But most of these guys, it's just too fresh.
Yeah.
They don't have any debt on their land.
Right.
They don't need to sell. They don't really understand the finances or the mechanics, and they don't really care, right? I mean, as far as they know, 2 years ago it was worth $100 a foot, and maybe I take a discount, it's $70 a foot, but I'm definitely not going to take 20, right? So that's been the biggest challenge in today's market and working on development deals.
Yeah, that's all true. And another way to approach that I've thought about, I haven't actually tried this on for size with land sellers, is like, look, we'll just work on your behalf, right? Don't worry about what the price is today. But if you sit on this, and again, back to my point about it, the highest and best use is an industrial use.
Yeah.
We know what we're doing. We know how to design it. We know how to work with, XYZ jurisdiction. Let's take it. Let's work together and take it all the way through. Then at least you have something in 2 or 3 years. Because if you sit here, the point is, if you sit here for 2 or 3 years and wait for the market to come back to 50, 60, 70 bucks a foot, you're still going to have 2 or 3 years on top of it, maybe longer.
Sure.
Because 5 years ago, I would have never guessed that it would have taken me 3 or 4 years to get an entitlement, right? So in the next 5 years, it's conceivable it's even longer. So I think those are conversations that are healthy for you to have. Like, don't worry what the value is today, but instead of sitting on it and doing nothing, it's probably a good idea to take it through entitlement and figure it out. I don't have all the answers to how that would mechanically work, but it does benefit both parties. Like,
for
at least,
sure,
you've embedded yourself with a land seller on a piece that we would develop, but maybe it's not tied up at a number, and then we figure out what the value is. You get that option, and you figure out what the value is 3 years from now when it's entitled, rather than just sitting there.
That is a very creative way to approach it, for sure, because they get to the benefit of accelerating that time frame and being involved in the upside.
Plus, I'll tell you something else that we all need to understand is working through the dynamics of the new legislation, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you are near a sensitive receptor, because really the low-hanging fruit's long gone.
Mm-hmm.
So we all, in our shop look around and go, we don't even know how to work through some of this stuff that's near a sensitive receptor. And what does AB98 look at? What does this city or this jurisdiction, this county, how are they looking at it? Because there's some stuff that's open to interpretation. So, we need to try a couple of these things on for size. So it might even be to our benefit to go through it, right?
There's case studies. Yeah.
I mean, just take it through the single line drawing phase and get to a DAB hearing or something like, okay, how close did we get? How much of this building? There's a building in Perris that we chased a number of years ago and we couldn't pull it together, but he's near a school, right? And like, we've gone back to him a couple of times and just said, let's just work on this, because you're just sitting here. Nobody is going to pay you market value, whatever that is, until this thing is entitled sitting across from that high school. It's not going to happen. Now, the good thing there are some avenues, and this is, sort of the nuance of what I'm trying to say. It's like with schools, you can approach them and find some avenues where they will be a proponent of the project, not an opponent. So there are some avenues that AB98 allows us to do with certain sensitive receptors. So that's the kind of stuff that, I want to roll up my sleeves and get in and like, okay, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Right. But I also want to have some of the end of it,
Yeah. I
mean, and a land seller's not going to pay me, $500,000 to go get their land entitled. But there's got to be a way. I just think there's a way to solve that. So
yeah, and it obviously ends up being mutually beneficial because you go through that learning curve. I mean, it's
totally.
Taking advantage of a time where not a lot is going on and kind of preparing for the upswing. On the topic of projects, I know you got 2 projects with Ryan Lau from Voight. You got one of them's.
I love you. Yeah, you got. I mean, I love Lau. He started with a guy by the name of Jeff Smith at Lee and Associates, and Jeff trained him. Jeff and I cut our teeth in the business. I mean, a lot of deals came my way with Jeff, and that shop where the brokers have an ownership, they're shareholders.
Sure.
And there was just something that clicked for us as an organization with that type of brokerage and aggressive. I mean, Jeff would be calling me on vacation. I'm like, man, leave me alone, but just relentless. I think I overheard you say, like, you just can't give up.
Right.
You just got to keep going. And so we've done a fair amount of deals with Lau. Yes, we have a 630 in Perris and a 425 in Hesperia. Hesperia is about, finish at Q1, end of Q1.
Both are under construction. The Perris one's planned, right? I mean, it's coming out of the ground. It's
permit ready. We're moving dirt right now. We got a big import that we started. We expect to close the construction loan probably the end of November.
Okay.
And then really been, grading and moving dirt in earnest in December. So it's imminent. You know, and I think some people pick up the phone and like, Smith, what are you thinking? I'm like, well, I'm thinking that, you know, end of 26, you know, early 27, things are going to be different. But I heard something really funny last week, and I have to give my buddy over at CB credit for this comment. But Joe Weirden, and he goes, we're on a call, and you know, we've all experienced this the last 2 years. It's like you're in the swimming pool, you're taking, you know, your lessons. You're a kid, and your mom. Every time you think you're going to reach her, she steps back. You know, that's what the market feels like. You just every time we think we're there, we're almost there. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed, man, and you know, reading the tea leaves and hoping. I think the fundamentals are there that we're going to be in good shape on a couple things that we've got coming out of the ground. We have some things coming in behind it. You know, we watch the market very carefully, and the thing with our ventures is I find our primary responsibility as the sponsor at Newcastle Partners is to bring the project along to decision points, right? I would never ask, you know, 6-9 months ago on any of these projects before they're ready for the next phase. Like, okay, you guys ready to cut loose on construction drawings as an example? Like, we're going to get through the planning commission, get through city council, whatever public hearings we have, and then go, okay, you know, we're recommending we kick off the construction drawings because it takes 6-9 months to get those approved. Right? So you've got to be out ahead of it, but bring it to that next decision point. We're not, yes, we own the dirt, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you just because you're at a certain point, you move forward. It's another decision point. Now, with that said, there is a little bit more pressure with the entitlements and the expiration.
Right.
Something that's really important. We used to take for granted an automatic 2-year extension on entitlements, right? Don't worry about it, you know. But when you get an approval, it usually lasts 2 years.
Right.
I guess maybe to be clear. So when we go through, we get approval of planning commission. The conditions of approval are valid for 2 years.
And this kind of ties back into AB98, right? Because I've heard through a number of folks that a lot of developers are motivated to get their projects off the ground because they're worried about 2 years from now, once they expire, that things may just be very different.
I would say pretty much guaranteed that you're not getting extensions. And that's what we used to take it for granted. Like, don't worry about it. If we're not ready if the market isn't ready for that building in 2 years, we'll get a 1 year or 2 year extension. Sort of was automatic. That is not the case anymore. As a matter of fact, it's quite the opposite. The cities will mostly tell you, if you don't move dirt, those are going to expire. We're not going to renew them. They will tell you that in many of these cities right now.
Wow.
So yes, there is going to be a little bit of an artificial supply that comes through. It's really hard to gauge that. We had a big conversation about this a couple weeks ago with one of our partners. And, you know, it's really hard for me to know because we just don't have that information. Like, when is this project going to, when was it approved? When was there 2 years? Did they get an extension? You know, it's almost impossible. And that led us to this structural demand issue, right? Which, you know, there's some, it's a little bit of a moving target, but historically the structure, the consistent demand, the net absorption in the IE has been a certain figure, right? Well, now the discussion is, well, is that number coming down? Is it structurally different? Is it lower? I don't think it's 50% lower. I do think it's going to be lower, just because of the artificial constraint, if you will, because of AB98, the political environment. There just isn't going to be as much product, so you can't absorb that much on a net basis year after year. But I would argue in favor of not a massive structural adjustment to the net absorption. In terms of, you've got the ports of LA and Long Beach, right? Spending billions. They're not going anywhere. Got rail's kicking up again. You have a consumer-driven economy in Southern California that no matter what, a lot of these users went to other parts, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Reno, because the rents, you know, our rent spiked at what, $135, $150? Sure. You know, for these huge big box buildings. Like, well, I can make it work in Phoenix for 50 cents on the dollar. Well, now they've readjusted and now they're back. And now the users are going, well, there's a baseline demand from corporate users that need to be in Southern California. So that's sort of my counter argument to, well, the structural net absorption is going to be much lower. I don't agree with that because I think there's also going to be a structural shift in the demand. We're like, oh, wait a minute.
These guys are coming back.
Well, I believe, and I've heard this directly from users, so it's not just my opinion, that we need to be in California. We need to be in Southern California for the, same day delivery, all those kind of things that happen. And I would rather, if I'm going to have a building and a facility in Phoenix or Las Vegas, as an example, if it's the same cost to me as a user, I'm going to be in Southern California.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I just think that, and again, that's a little bit of rose-colored glasses and thinking quite optimistically, but I just think, again, structurally, that makes sense to me, that there's that demand. I mean, I know my own household. There's a box showing up on my porch every other day.
Yeah. I agree. 100%.
I just don't think that.
Sometimes twice a day.
I just don't think it's going to change, right? It was a fundamental shift, man. That curve for our online consumer, purchases went like this during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's tapered off, but I think there's a fundamental shift.
Consumer behavior, yeah.
I mean, I love going to the hardware store, and tinkering and finding stuff on Saturday morning, but there's a lot of times where I'll just go, I just don't have time for that. I'm going to click. I can, even though I feel a little guilty about, some $8 item that shows up on my, front doorstep.
Yeah.
24 hours. I'm
I guess.
That's kind of nice,
Yeah, 100%.
Had a little problem to solve at the house that my wife was on me about. And so I was like, I could go to Home Depot and try to find this thing, but I think I could,
take my chances with Amazon. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It is way too convenient. I mean, at the tip of your fingers, anything you need. I very rarely do any retail shopping myself anymore. Even, I never thought clothes, like clothes and shoes.
I know.
I'm buying online.
I know. And the shift for me, and I would imagine it's similar for a lot of consumers, is there is this mind shift of, why is it taking 2 days to get here?
Yeah.
I really as soon as I click,
2 days is,
as soon as I click buy,
yeah.
And my point of that is that warehouse got to be pretty close to your house to order show up, within 24 hours.
Yep.
So, even with all the obstacles, I still think there's, it's going to continue. I don't see it slowing down.
So given all of these kind of challenges and maybe developing in infill markets, I know you guys you have the project in Hesperia. What was the thesis of, and I know there's Amazon's up there and a number of large corporate users are up there, but what was the thesis of starting to go doing building for lease and sale? It's a 400,000 square foot building in Hesperia.
Yeah, a spec project up there. It's a good question. When, even before AB98 was sort of, there was being whispers of that, because that was in play for a little while. It was that, and I've forgotten the legislation, but South Coast Air Quality Management District. Remember they put that tax on?
Okay.
On anything over, I think it was 200,000 square feet.
Okay.
That was probably 5 years ago. And so that was one, like, okay, well, the users are going to start paying this tax now to the Air Quality Management District. And it was, that tax did not apply in the high desert in IE North.
Okay.
So that was number one. Sort of got me thinking about it. I had looked out the 10 and there just wasn't really anything that I was super interested in banning Beaumont. A lot of the good sites have been taken. There was some discussion about going further into Palm Desert. And I was just like, it doesn't feel quite right. And then, so we just started looking up there. I'd heard about what Covington was doing and they had gobbled up almost everything.
Mm-hmm.
But we started looking at the demographics, the employees, the number of employees that were cruising down the 15 into, Ontario, Rancho, and this incredible employee base that was in IE North or High Desert. And so I think that's what really turned our attention up there as opposed to going out the 10. And Lau, brought us, said, hey, I know you guys are thinking about this up here. How about this 18 acres for us is like right down the middle of the fairway. We typically don't develop anything less than 5 acres. We have and continue to look at it. But I really think 10 to 20 is right down the middle of the fairway for us. I love building 400s, built a lot of them in my career. So I can pretty much on the back of a napkin figure out what costs are. Of course, we didn't, demand was a huge question. I think we knew at the basis that we could do well with competing against Ontario, Rialto, North Fontana, just on a price point.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what compelled us to go up there, start looking around. And that 18-acre piece came up right in the middle of where Covington. I'm like, right off the 15. I didn't have to go to Victorville. I'm like, this is only, 20, 22 minutes from where I'm already looking. It's an easy drive, freeway visible. We do prefer, one of the niches that we have is that size of building, the 2 to 4s that are near or freeway visible, sort of like kind of, we all have our little specialties. And that's just one thing that I really like. I'd done some stuff on the 215, the 210, but I drove up there and I'm like, man, this thing is freeway visible. Covington, it's surrounded by entitled land. They're build to suit only. They won't go spec. I said, you know what, let's go up here and, try and tackle this. So that's, kind of a long-winded answer to your question.
So as far as competition, you weren't worried that Covington was going to build something next door to you and now you're suddenly competing with something comparable?
No, because I trusted the fact that, and it's panned out so far, that they wouldn't go vertical on a spec building. But if they did, it was going to be a build-to-suit, and that would only help me. So
bringing more users into the market.
For sure. And then, again, I keep going back to this, better to be lucky than smart. We didn't know Amazon was going to come up there. They're, as soon as they finish the hub, they'll be at 4 million square feet.
Yep.
So I would tell you with a straight face that I think my investors are going to be very happy.
Yeah.
I think good things happen when Amazon starts, gobbling up space. Some user and some form of fashion is going to need 400,000 square feet, and I'm going to be standing there waiting.
Yeah. With a nice brand new construction building.
So, yeah.
And it's marketed for lease and for sale.
It is.
That's a huge differentiator when you're building buildings, is just the flexibility to sell.
Yeah.
And especially as you know, in our market today, majority of the new building transaction sales are being sold to owner users who are in the market to buy something.
Right.
And it delivers, you said, the first quarter of next year.
First quarter of next year. And actually, I would have thought 3 years ago that a 400 was a bit big for a user sale. But I will tell you that the activity we have is from users to purchase.
Yep.
Surprisingly. So it's a pleasant surprise, but I wouldn't have, 3 years ago gone to my partners and said, this is a user sale building. It's for lease and sell it as a leased investment.
It's interesting because I was having that conversation with someone I can't remember who it was, a couple of days ago about, the increased interest from owner users looking to buy product.
Right.
And I wonder, I don't know if it's necessarily increased interest or if it's just that investors have pulled back their valuations and now suddenly the users are in a position to potentially buy a building. Yeah,
fair point. I mean, I think consistently, certainly in my career, there's always been user sales. I've sold a number of buildings, but most of them have been 100,000 and less. So I do think what has shifted is users buying bigger buildings.
Okay.
So
that's more of a new trend.
That's more of a new trend. But no, I mean, if I'm building a 50 or 100, we were always kind of and there used to be a disparity between what an investor would pay. Yep. Right. So there's another shift. 5-10 years ago, you would, like, in my performer, I would have a sale price and a lease price. The sale price was always considered to be for a user. It was never an investor. And then over time, that price, that differential between what an investor would buy it for and a user flattened out. There was no disparity. Right. In some cases, investors were paying more than what the users were. I think that's gone back to the, what you would consider a normal disparity between a user and an investor sale price. But yeah, I do think, even on the 600, Lau will call me and go, you guys are selling this, I've got a user or I've heard about a user. I'm like, for a 600? Okay.
Yeah.
But I fully expect, I think our primary business model is still focused on the lease market, right? So those might be a little bit of a unicorn still in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But our primary focus would be to lease it, and then our funds typically sell. So
Sure.
whether it's to a user or we lease it and then sell it, it's short term. So we're not, those two anyway will be sold one way or another.
Yeah. One last question, I guess, for you is, given you have worked with a lot of professionals in the industry, you've got great experience and a reputation. What are some nuggets you can share with somebody either my age or at my point in my career, or even a younger person who's looking to grow in the business?
That's a great question, and I think this is a good start. You and I talked a little bit about this when you asked me to come on board. I think stuff like this is really helpful, because I know that people in the industry that have been doing it for a while, we got a lot of stuff thrown at us, right? The decision makers, deals. We're consummate deal junkies, right? I'm always looking for something, whether it's existing, iOS, land.
Sure.
I look at a lot of stuff, but when I can try to do a couple things at once, like listen to a podcast, right? That's entertaining, and I was mentioning to you, I do that. So I think being out in the forefront of that's a little bit of a nuanced piece. But I think, and I'll speak for myself, I know some other people in the business that feel the same way, but I think we like the brokers that tend to hustle and don't give up. Like, no, wait a minute, did you look at it this way, right? Because I don't have all the answers, I mean, there might be something put in front of me that I'm like, no, I have no interest. And then you might call me back and go, did you think about looking at it this way? Or, so that's helpful.
Sure.
Because I just can't think through everything. I think, just in my brother's words, you just got to throw a lot of stuff at the wall, man. Find people that you like working with, that you can have a rapport, right? Hey, I don't mind bringing this. I mean, this might be a bad idea or a dumb idea, but let me just throw it to Jackson. That I love that kind of stuff. I sit. My daughter works for me, and I go sit in her office, and like, we'll have a problem, and I'll just start talking to her, just yakking about it, and she's like rolling her eyes, like But you never know, what works, and I think the historical knocking on doors you kind of mentioned to me, that's changed a little bit. I think being creative with land sellers, like we talked about, hey, what do you think about this? Instead of worrying about the price, what about, getting this thing entitled, and just, I think, outside the box a little bit. And I don't, probably hear that a lot, but it is important, like, because you never know what is actually going to work with me, a land seller, I mean, and you never know where the business is coming from. So
I think you bring up two good points, because I 100% agree that, like, the idea of just not only giving up and trying hard, and then at the same time, if you combine that with a collaborative spirit with the people that you are working with, new ideas will come up. Just through this conversation, you kind of got me thinking about a couple things. A couple things, a couple different assignments I'm working on, a couple different pursuits. And the only way you're able to get those realizations to inch you closer to a deal is to, for lack of a better word, just show up every day and keep doing it, right? I mean, if you're, and there's, I don't want to say a lot of brokers like this, but there are brokers in the industry at times that might be like, hey, you know what? The market is kind of soft. I'm just going to take some time off.
Oh,
right.
I know.
And so to me, that's the most opportune time to do what we're talking about.
For sure. I think never forgets people business. Don't burn any bridges, no matter what. Small community, man.
Yep.
I mean, I still see the same faces that the last 20, 30 years. Went to fight night. I talked about that. And I'm like, I hadn't been in a while. Okay, there's a whole new crowd, but then there's the old crowd.
It's like a reunion for you.
It really is. So maintain those connections. People business. Don't burn any bridges. and just keep at it. Like you can hear no 1,000 times. I mean, my brother, like I said, he is a consummate salesman, right? When someone would turn him down, my dad would we would literally sit at a conference table facing the wall. My dad, there were 2 phones. He'd give us prospect lists, and all we did was call all day tenants.
Yeah, I'm liking this.
In the Anaheim Orange area.
Yeah.
Like, just find out. All I wanted to know is when the leases expired. He had a project coming along, and all we would do is just write down leases expired. And what that's wasn't
good data.
Easy. Even in those days, it wasn't easy to get through to the person who actually knew when the lease expired, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually harder because you're probably calling the operator, right? I mean,
and my brother developed this whole report, and if someone would hang up on him, he would pick up the phone and call, and this is his personality. He would just call him right back and go, "No, I'm hanging up on you now."
now that's funny. Yeah,
So
you gamify it.
And I would be like, I just move. My wife laughs every time I tell this story. I would just move my call list over to him, and I would sit there, because I hated that call list thing. And my dad would pay us, I don't know, $5 for every appointment we could get, or whatever we were doing. My brother would be like, "Yeah, I'll split it with you, but just give me that list," because he'd feel sorry for me,
Good.
But my point of that is just keep going, like I have a similar. We don't have a fund, right? So every deal I capitalize separately, which means I have to reach out and go, okay, I've got a deal, right? Okay, Shai's brought me something I think is really interesting. Then I got to get on the phone. I got to start making phone calls, right? I don't have I have my go-to, right? I'll have my top 3 or 5, but more often than not, it's wrong time. All that fund's closed. Oh, we've got a 150 or we've got a 200, whatever it is, right? You burned that first 5 in 5 minutes. Then you've got, your next list. And, it's not uncommon for me to make 50, 60 calls sometimes. Sometimes I still no at the end of that.
In many ways, you're doing something very similar, except there's a few more moving pieces and putting a deal together.
And I learn from each call that I make, right? I make a note. I try to anyway. It's like, oh, well, that didn't feel very good. I thought for sure that was going to be a yes. Somebody we'd done a bunch of business with, and I didn't think about that. Or they'll say something about the site. It's your project and it's your baby, and then all of a sudden they'll go, "Yeah, Smith, I really don't like that driveway location or the fact that it's a single tenant building." Like, boy, and they start hearing that consistently.
Yeah.
But you can't get discouraged. You got to go, okay, okay, now I know what the objection is, or I know what the consistent message is from those potential partners is what their objections are. And so I take those objections, formulate it, have a response to that, and not oversell, but at least have an answer. Like, here's what I think. And be genuine. I would say that too. It's like, I mean, a lot of times I'll hear from capital and I don't like the message, or, they'll shoot me as the messenger, so to speak. But I'm like, I got to deliver the bad news.
Right.
Like, this is just the way it is. And just,
Yep.
So
back to maintaining good relationships.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much for coming. It was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Love it, man. Thank you. Good. Thank you for listening to Adding Value with Shai Sar. We'll continue bringing on guests with stories and insights that matter in the world of industrial real estate. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend or colleague. And if you're a landlord, tenant, or investor exploring opportunities in the Inland Empire, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to help you navigate the market.